In 1986, a wave of terror washed over Paris. It started with the brutal murder of an 11-year-old girl, and soon, the City of Light would find itself living in the shadow of a predator, a man who seemed to vanish into thin air after every attack. Over the next decade, a serial killer and rapist would prey on the innocent, leaving a trail of devastation and broken families in his wake. Witnesses described him as Grêlé, the pockmarked man because of the acne scars on his face. But for years, his identity remained an unsolved mystery. It began with a child, 11-year-old Cécile Bloch, found strangled in the basement of her apartment building in the heart of Paris. The year was 1986. Her family had noticed a suspicious man in the elevator that morning, his face scarred by acne. No one knew that this was the last time anyone would see Cécile alive. Despite extensive investigations, the trail went cold. For nearly a decade, Grêlé seemed to disappear. The police were baffled. How could a man so brazen, so cruel, simply vanish? Was he dead? In prison? Or was he still out there, hiding in plain sight? For 2 years, Paris was on edge. But in 1987, Grêlé struck again. This time, his victims were 38-year-old Gilles Politi and 20-year-old Irmgard Muller. They were tortured and murdered in Politi's apartment, in a crime that shocked even the most hardened investigators. Just like with Cécile, the killer left no trace of his identity except for the same chilling description: a man with pockmarked skin, always lurking, always watching. And murder wasn't his only crime. By the early 1990s, a disturbing pattern of rapes had emerged across the city. Young women were being attacked by a man who would identify himself as a police officer, using his position of trust to lure them into a false sense of safety before revealing his true, horrifying intentions. And again, despite intense efforts, every lead eventually dried up. Each time Grêlé struck, he seemed to vanish without a trace. For nearly a decade, there were no new crimes, no sign of the killer. Investigators were left frustrated and confused. How could someone so brutal simply fade into the background? Had he been caught for another crime? Or was he still out there, living among them, hidden in plain sight? It wasn't until decades later, in the 2010s, that a breakthrough came. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, the police were able to link several cold cases to the same perpetrator. The walls were closing in on Grêlé, but his true identity still remained a mystery. As the DNA trail narrowed, police began re-examining suspects. Thousands of men had been tested over the years, but now they had their sights set on a much smaller group. In September 2021, a man was reported missing by his family. His wife, concerned after days of silence, contacted the police. A search led them to a small apartment in the south of France, where they discovered his body. The man had taken his own life. Alongside his body was a letter, a confession that would end one of France's most infamous manhunts. The note reads, "I am François Vérove. I am Grêlé." François Vérove had been living a double life. By day, he was a respected policeman and later a local politician. But beneath the surface, he was hiding a terrible secret. He was Grêlé, the serial killer who had evaded justice for over 35 years. "You met me in 1984 when I was a young policeman. I was nourishing an uncontrollable rage that made me a criminal." Vérove claimed that his violent impulses had disappeared after he started therapy in 1997, but his past crimes had finally caught up with him. Rather than face justice, he chose to end his life, knowing that prosecution would end with his death. With Vérove's death, the case was officially closed, but for the families of his victims, the pain remains. How had this man, an officer of the law, escaped suspicion for so long? Could the system have caught him sooner?